The story begins as we see a boy being mocked for his weak magic, and a noble declares that magic will never favor someone like him. The noble decides to show him a real spell, burning him alive, but he admires the beauty of the noble's magic, and he wishes he could have another chance to learn it. He suddenly wakes up in a room full of maids, but he thinks they're giants, so he tries to defend himself, shooting a fireball that blows a hole through the roof. The city celebrates the birth of the 7th Prince Lloyd, but the maids can't believe what he just did. 6 years later, we see the maids searching for Lloyd, and they decide to check another area. He comes out of hiding, but he's seen by 2 nobles, so he tells them not to alert the maids, and they agree to this, inviting him to join their hunt, but Lloyd runs away. One of them wonders why his companion wants to win Lloyd's favor, since he's the 7th son, so he's unlikely to become the king. But the noble recalls how Lloyd read magic books when he was a baby, so he believes Lloyd is the reincarnation of the great William Bourdeaux, the father of magic. Lloyd overhears this, and he notes that he really reincarnated, but he was just a peasant in his previous life. He goes to the library, since he only cares about magic, so he wants to learn as much as he can. He picks up one of the books, but his maid Silpha suddenly takes it from him, and he realizes he's been discovered. They start training together, but Lloyd thinks he doesn't need to learn swordsmanship, since he isn't competing for the throne. But Silpha explains that he still needs to learn it as a member of the royal family, and she declares that his education is her life mission. Lloyd realizes that she'll force him to fight until evening if he slacks off, so he decides to get it over with. They keep fighting, and Silpha notes that he's getting stronger. Lloyd knows she always holds back, but now he's using a control magic to copy her movements, so he's basically cheating. He continues fighting, but he realizes that he's still at a disadvantage, because she's far stronger than him. So he uses physical enhancement magic to bridge the gap, and he also uses levitation. He continues the battle, and Silpha notes that he's stronger than before. He decides to turn off the control spell to surprise her, and prepares to deliver the finishing blow, but she blocks his attack, saying she knows he's cheating, and immediately defeats him. She reveals that she was able to notice the difference after he used his magic, but she's actually happy to see how talented he is, and she's proud that he can use 2 spells at once, because even Imperial mages struggled to do it. But he notes that he was actually using 4 spells, and is relieved that she didn't discover the physical enhancement and control magic. Later that day, Lloyd hears about a forbidden library, which has a demon named Grimoire sealed in a book because it almost destroyed an entire empire. He manages to find the library, and he uses concealment magic to hide himself. He approaches the entrance, and one of the guards is sleepy, so the other one tells him to stay alert, since there's a powerful demon inside, and the library's magic could shake the entire kingdom. Lloyd walks past them, but the guards mention that no one will be able to access the library, since 10 of the most powerful mages created an unbreakable seal. But Lloyd easily breaks it, and he enters the library, saying he had no idea that such an interesting section existed in the castle. He begins to study the books, but one of them suddenly starts levitating, and the demon Grimoire appears, saying he's impressed that a boy was able to break the barrier. He explains that he's sealed, and he asks Lloyd to help him escape, saying the seal is wearing off, so it's only a matter of time before he breaks out. He offers to give gold in exchange for Lloyd's help, but he realizes that the gold is actually a creation magic and it's of low quality. So he explains that he'll put the seal back after he finishes reading, saying his study depends on the kingdom, so he wants to preserve it. Grimoire is worried, so he tries to convince Lloyd that he won't do anything to harm the humans, but Lloyd knows he can't be trusted. But he talks about magic, saying he can teach Lloyd about spells lost centuries ago. So Lloyd closes his book, and he's captivated by the idea, so he creates a magic key, and manages to break the seal. Grimoire is freed, and Lloyd asks him to use an ancient spell, so he tries to kill Lloyd with a spell called Arctis Obscura, and the room is destroyed by its power. He wonders what he's going to do now that he's free, but we see that Lloyd survived, because he was protected by a barrier. He's impressed by the ancient magic, realizing that it's nothing like the other spells he encountered. He asks for more, and Grimoire keeps using his spell, thinking Lloyd is underestimating him, but it doesn't penetrate the barrier, as Lloyd analyzes the spell. He wonders what it's like to be hit by that kind of magic, so he touches it with his finger, realizing it's painful, but also beautiful, and he wonders what else Grimoire has to show him. He becomes furious, so he grows another head and recites 2 spells at the same time, combining them to launch a powerful attack. But Lloyd continues analyzing, and he notes that casting 2 spells at the same time is usually impossible. But demons can grow another mouth, so they're capable of using more advanced magic. Grimoire can't believe his strongest spell didn't work, and Lloyd is excited, thinking learning it must be fun. Grimoire tries to escape, but he realizes that he's trapped inside, so he wonders how many barriers Lloyd can make. Lloyd explains that they're under the castle, and he decided to take precautions so his magic doesn't get out of control like before, and we see that the entire library is protected. He mentions that he wants to see Grimoire's defense magic, and he launches a fireball at Grimoire, burning him to a crisp, but Lloyd wonders why he didn't defend himself. Lloyd uses his magic to fix the library, and Grimoire is impressed with his magic, recognizing him as his master. But Lloyd thinks Grimoire is amazing, since demons can't die from magic. He wonders how much pain a demon can endure, and this terrifies Grimoire, so he swears his loyalty to Lloyd as his familiar. He agrees to this, but thinks Grimoire needs to change his appearance, so he transforms into a cuter version of himself, planning to attack Lloyd when he lets his guard down. He asks Grimoire to hide in his clothes, and Grimoire thinks he's a fool because he can control Lloyd's mind if he gets too close. But as he touches Lloyd, he realizes that Lloyd's mana is too dense, so he can't do anything against him. Grimoire thinks it's better to be obedient for now, so he tells Lloyd to call him Grim, and he ends up becoming Lloyd's familiar. We see the second Prince Albert getting ready, and he goes to visit Lloyd, so Grim hides from him. They head to the training field, where Albert uses his magic to hit targets, and Lloyd tells Grim that Albert is strong and smart, so the nobles think he's going to be the next king. He also has permission to go to all areas of the castle, and he invited Lloyd to join him, so this is one of the rare chances where he can use magic in front of others. Albert tells him it's his turn, but he thinks he shouldn't draw too much attention, because he doesn't want to be dragged into the succession dispute. So he decides to just graze the targets, and the nobles aren't impressed, thinking he's nothing special. But Grim thinks they're fools, since they didn't notice that the targets were hit in the same way, which is much harder than just hitting. Lloyd is thinking about how rotation makes the trajectory more stable, so Grim thinks he's a magic maniac. Albert seems to notice something, so he decides to take a break and leaves Lloyd alone, but he can't believe how lucky he is, because now he has an empty shooting gallery to train in. He mentions that he wants to test new tricks, like the dual enchantment that Grim showed him. But Grim thinks this is impossible, since it's exclusive to demons, but Lloyd doesn't see the problem, and he absorbs Grim, who starts screaming, asking him who would assimilate a demon into their body, but Lloyd is just happy that it worked. The two start reciting together, but Grim gets overwhelmed and freaks out, wondering what Lloyd was doing. So he explains that it was a spell stack, saying he was shortening enchantments by mixing the chance of multiple spells, which allows him to reduce the enchantment time. He reveals he was trying to stack 100 enchantments, but Grim can't believe this, since a spell stack should only have 2 or 3 spells at a time. Lloyd tries something else, and he manages to speak through Grim's mouth. So he decides to use 2 advanced spells at the same time, casting a water and a fire spell, but Grim can't believe he's trying to merge 2 different types of magic. Lloyd feels the power flowing through his body, and thinks he shouldn't point this at anything, so he launches the magic into the skies. Albert is having tea, and the ministers wonder why he pays so much attention to Lloyd, because he's just a child. But Albert thinks they don't have an eye for talent, and he explains that Lloyd hit the targets in the same way, thinking he did it on purpose. Albert tells them he's a prodigy who will become a great sage one day, so he's a valuable asset to the kingdom, and the ministers praise Albert for his insight. He wonders if Lloyd hit all the targets, but the ministers think it's too early, and they realize that the sky is dark. We see the field destroyed, and Grim is terrified because Lloyd opened a hole in the sky. He's enchanted by the magic, but he panics as he sees the hole, wondering how he's supposed to get rid of it, but it disappears after a while. The next day, Grim sees the hole in the newspaper, but Lloyd is more interested in a party of adventurers who cleared a rank A dungeon. He thinks this is a chance to bring back magical items, so he decides to go to a dungeon, but Grim mentions that he can't, reminding him that everyone will notice if he leaves. But he thinks he can handle it, and uses a pellet to create a clone of himself. Grim realizes the clone is identical to Lloyd, so he should be able to leave, but he knows this isn't enough to fool Silpha, so he explains that he has a plan. We see Lloyd leading the castle, and he talks to Grim from a distance, wondering how he is, so Grim reveals that he's trying to imitate Lloyd. He remembers how Lloyd put his mind into the clone, and his body into Lloyd's hand, finding Lloyd truly impressive. He asks Grim to deceive Silpha while he goes to the dungeon, but Grim realizes he can do whatever he wants with Lloyd away. But Lloyd mentions that he's glad to have Grim as his familiar, and this seems to touch Grim, so he tells Lloyd to return soon. He wonders how to find a dungeon, and he sees a girl running from a group of orcs, but she suddenly attacks them, taking them down. Lloyd realizes she did this thanks to her breathing, and he read that in foreign countries, the fighters use breathing to channel an energy called ki, which allows them to use incredible techniques. The girl notices Lloyd spying on her, so he decides to introduce himself, but Grim reminds him that he can't be discovered as the seventh prince. Lloyd realizes he's right, but the girl is already running towards him, and she prepares to fight him, but we see that he changed his appearance, introducing himself as Robert. We learn that he used an illusion spell, but it can only transform him into people he has already met, so he used the double incantation to merge his appearance with Albert's. She introduces herself as Tao, a Class B adventurer, and she can't believe how handsome he is. She thinks that after 18 years of training, she has finally met someone she wants to be with, so she decides to make him her boyfriend. Lloyd explains that he was just looking for a dungeon, so she immediately offers to help him. They reach a dungeon, and Tao defeats all the monsters for him, wondering if he's impressed by her strength, but he's more interested in the shiny stones at the dungeon. They decide to take a break to eat, and Lloyd asks her about ki, so she's surprised that he knows about it, because it isn't well known on this continent. She explains that ki circulates through breathing, which allows its user to gain supernatural powers. She mentions that it requires a lot of practice, and she suddenly notices that he's practicing, but he feels pain in his lungs. She asks him what he's doing, so he explains that he just tried to copy what she did. She's worried, since it seems like his lungs are on fire, but he ignores her and tries again, since he felt an energy different from mana. He thinks he can use this to improve his magic, and Tao realizes he's really interested, so she decides to teach him about ki. She's struck by his beauty, and she tells him to maintain his breathing until they leave the dungeon. We return to Grim, who thinks Lloyd is weird for having a good life in the castle and not caring about it. But Silpha suddenly appears behind him, so he becomes worried. Tao keeps defeating the monsters, and she explains that she killed the dungeon boss using a ki burst. They're about to collect the reward, but she thinks they won't find good treasure inside the chest, because the dungeon is too easy. Lloyd is fascinated by the treasure chest, and Tao notes that he's already used to the breathing, thinking he's so good that even her grandfather would approve of him as her fiancé. They decide to open the chest, but something suddenly attacks them, so Lloyd saves her, as a lich appears. Lloyd wonders what a lich is, but she assures him that he doesn't need to worry, so he should just leave the dungeon while she deals with it. He explains that he wants to see the battle, but she suddenly attacks him, sending him flying, because she wants to save his life. The lich attacks her, but she dodges, wondering what a lich is doing in a low-level dungeon, because even elite adventurers struggle to defeat it. She hopes to buy enough time for Lloyd to escape, while he continues flying, thinking there's still much he needs to learn. He uses his barrier to help him recover, wondering if she'll be okay, and he asks what Grim thinks, but he's acting strange, begging him to return to the castle. Meanwhile, Tao is holding off the lich, but thinks she's going to die. The lich notices she's using ki, and mentions that he defeated someone who used this technique before, but thinks it's nothing more than a cheap form of magic. He reveals that he eats the souls of adventurers who challenge the dungeon, and this allows him to steal their abilities, but he thinks she isn't worth devouring. He wonders if Lloyd is more capable than her, since he managed to dodge the surprise attack. Tao realizes that both Lloyd and the lich are after knowledge, but they're the complete opposite of each other, because Lloyd finds even the smallest things interesting. She's happy that Lloyd finds ki impressive, and he's different from other people in this country, who treat ki as a cheap technique. The lich thinks she's talking nonsense, but Tao suddenly attacks him, so he protects himself with a barrier. But she keeps attacking, saying she's been training her ki since she was a child, and she gave up everything for martial arts, so she never had a boyfriend. She manages to break the Lich's barrier and uses all of her strength to attack him with a burst of ki. But she becomes exhausted, unable to move her body, and she discovers that the Lich was able to dodge. He tells her she's too weak to defeat him and mentions that she wasted her life. He casts his spell, shattering the ground, but it suddenly starts to break, and we see Lloyd protecting her with his barrier, asking her to let him take over because he's in a hurry. The Lich starts casting a spell, but Lloyd suddenly appears behind him, so he wonders how Lloyd used magic without reciting an enchantment. Tao realizes he's using ki, and the Lich begins attacking him, but he focuses on using ki and magic. He continues practicing his techniques while the Lich attacks him, but he realizes that his barrier is preventing him from getting air. So he dispels the barrier, but the Lich thinks he was able to destroy it. He launches a combined attack, but Lloyd uses his ki to dodge it, and he finally manages to merge mana and ki, using it to stop the Lich's attacks, but he thinks it isn't strong enough. He focuses on ki, attacking the Lich with ki bursts, and the Lich wonders how he's able to attack without enchantment, wondering if a ki technique can be so powerful. Lloyd is able to improve his technique, and he manages to defeat the Lich by cutting him in half, so Tao thinks he's amazing. They collect the dungeon's reward, and Tao is disappointed, but Lloyd asks to keep it, since the knife seems to have an enchantment. The dungeon suddenly begins to collapse, as Tao explains that this happens after the treasure is taken. Lloyd thinks the chest is actually the core of the dungeon, and explains that it stays underground until someone drops a magic item. So it absorbs the object, and creates a dungeon around it to gather more magical items from adventurers. He thinks this is a great opportunity, but Tao thinks they should leave quickly, and he finally manages to pull out the chest, but they almost get crushed to death. Tao is impressed with him, but asks him why he didn't use magic, and she thinks he was protecting her honor. But Lloyd explains that it seemed fun, and he realizes he needs to return, so he starts flying. She reveals that he used a secret technique called Ki Blade, and she notes that she isn't strong enough to use it, so she promises to improve. He starts flying away, and she wants to be good enough for him, but she realizes that she may never see him again. Lloyd returns to the castle, and he finds Grim beaten on the floor. He's traumatized by Silpha, and we learn that she gave him a beating during their sparring match, thinking Lloyd is getting weaker. So he cries, asking Lloyd why he didn't return earlier, and Grim is annoyed that he suffered for Lloyd to get a worthless knife, but Lloyd assures him it's a real treasure. He places it in hot water and scrapes its surface, explaining that it was treated with mana essence, which is a catalyst for enchantments, and he realizes that it was enchanted with boost power. Grim wonders if he'll be able to create enchantments, but he explains that this is a difficult technique to learn, and the essence is lost along with the weapon if he fails. So he decides to analyze the essence to create one of his own, and he uses purification magic, and they discover the recipe for the mana essence. Lloyd realizes it's made of oil, silver, and hematite, but Grim thinks this is difficult to obtain since it's made with monster core. But Lloyd mentions that they already have the dungeon's core, so they just need silver and oil, and several weapons they can test enchantments on. Lloyd goes to the king to ask for silver coins, and his father gives him a bag full of them, so he leaves happily, but the king thinks his son is modest for only asking for silver coins. Lloyd and Grim melt the coins, and we see Lloyd fighting against Silpha. He's giving it his all, using the sprint spell to close the distance and transforming the ground to make her lose her balance. He prepares to hit her, but she disappears and ends up defeating him. She gives him the oil as part of their deal, but Lloyd reminds her that the deal was to get the oil only if he hit her. But she explains that she's happy now, because she was worried after his terrible performance yesterday, thinking he was just having a bad day. Lloyd runs off, and he starts mixing the ingredients for the enchantment. He asks Albert for weapons to test enchantments, since he's surrounded by guards, and he wonders if anyone would like to give a weapon to his little brother. But the guards don't want to give the weapons they bought to a child, since enchantment magic rarely works, but they have no choice, so they give up their weapons. Lloyd begins enchanting their weapons, and Grim is surprised that he's writing multiple layers of spells. But this causes the steel to break, because it can't handle the enchantments. Lloyd starts over, but the weapons keep breaking, and he spends all night doing this. He goes to Albert to show him the swords, but confesses that he only managed to enchant 50 out of 120 swords. Lloyd remembers that he was able to enchant more, but tried to put even more spells on them, so they ended up breaking. But Albert is impressed, since the best enchanters only have a 10% success rate, so he realizes that Lloyd is extremely talented. But one of the guards thinks he's lying, and he probably handed over the swords without any enchantment, but the guard's sword cuts through the sheath. Albert is impressed with one of the weapons, and Lloyd wants to see the swords in action. So Albert explains that the king ordered them to hunt a monster, saying he can join them. We see Silpha driving a carriage, and the princes are incited to hunt the monster. Lloyd is excited, since he doesn't leave the palace often, and he wants to see his swords in action. Silpha thanks Albert for letting her accompany them, and he explains that he doesn't want her to be worried about Lloyd. She thinks it's natural because she's Lloyd's teacher and guard, but Albert wonders if she has other feelings for him. So she draws her sword, and Albert fears for his safety, but she senses enemies nearby, and they're attacked by a group of kobolds, as the soldiers swear to defend Albert. Lloyd seems afraid, but Grimm knows that he was the first to notice them, and we learn that Tao taught him a key technique that allows him to sense everything around him. It's a basic key technique, but is extremely effective, and Grimm thinks he's getting scarier each day. He watches the fight, and the guards can't believe how sharp their weapons have become, because it's cutting through the kobolds like paper, so he realizes that the enchantment worked. Albert tells everyone that this is the power of his little brother, and Silpha also thinks he's incredible, as she stands atop a pile of kobolds, but he notes that he never enchanted her weapon. One of the kobolds tries to attack Lloyd, but Tao saves him, having run over as soon as she sensed a presence, and Lloyd is shocked to see her. She notices that he's using key breathing, so she thinks it must be Lloyd, realizing that he looks like Robert, so she becomes suspicious, but Silpha tells her to back off. The two start facing off, so Albert tries to prevent the fight and invites Tao to camp with them. They camp near a lake, as Albert introduces himself as the second prince of Salem, and Tao can't believe he's a prince. She thinks that he and Robert also look alike, but feels that Lloyd has a presence more similar to Robert's. So she starts looking for him, and Lloyd curses himself for using Key, because he didn't think she would appear. Grimm thinks he can't stop, or it would look suspicious, so he decides to hide in the tent, but he finds Silpha changing clothes. He wonders why she's in his tent, and she tells him they'll sleep together, since she's the only one who can protect him. Lloyd doesn't think it's necessary, and tries to leave, but she stops him, because she doesn't want him to meet Tao. But she suddenly appears looking for Robert, so Silpha throws a knife at her. They go outside, while Silpha apologizes to Tao, explaining she sensed an idiot, so they start to argue, and Lloyd sneaks out. He finds Albert, who tells him he's breaking their hearts, and asks him to be careful, since women can be scary. Silpha and Tao realize the soldiers are watching them, so they beat them up. Tao explains that she was hired to restore an ancient temple, and Lloyd notices it's on top of the hill, but Silpha just tells her to leave. Albert stops her, saying it's dangerous to go alone, and he thinks her detection ability is useful, so he asks her to join them until dawn, but a wolf suddenly appears. They realize it's the monster they're looking for, a beowulf, and the soldiers prepare to fight it, as Silpha protects Lloyd. He's excited to see the beowulf, but notices that Grimm is looking at the temple, and it seems familiar to him. Tao also joins the fight, and Albert decides to join the battle, casting a spell amplified by the sword that Lloyd enchanted. He attacks the monster, killing it in one hit, so everyone praises Albert, but he knows that Lloyd's enchantments helped him defeat it. So he praises Lloyd, who notes that the extra enchantments on his sword worked. But Grimm recalls that there was a demon sealed in that temple, and the beowulf rises again, as a group of monsters suddenly appears. Something comes out of its mouth, and it's a demon named Pazu, who tells them they will die for harming one of his minions. The monsters attack them, and Albert manages to strike one in the eye, but it quickly heals. Tao saves him, but the monsters keep regenerating, and they think the demon must be behind this. Grimm explains that Pazu is transmuting his mana to control the monsters, and he's injecting his mana into them, allowing them to regenerate, so the fight won't end unless they defeat him. But Lloyd is more interested in learning about mana transmutation, and Grimm tells him this isn't the time for that, because everyone's fighting for their lives. But Lloyd thinks they'll be fine, and he orders Grimm to teach him. Pazu admits that a few of them have talent, but most are only alive thanks to their weapons. But he thinks Lloyd is the worst, so he starts insulting him, and Silpha becomes angry. Tao senses her aura, as she asks Lloyd for permission to go, and he tells her to do whatever she wants. She stands before Pazu, and he wonders if she wants to serve him, but she explains that she's bothered by his bad smell, which is spoiling Lloyd's fresh air, so she decides to kill him. But he thinks they can't defeat his minions, because they'll continue to regenerate as long as he keeps channeling his mana into them, and demons have no shortage of mana. He thinks she's trembling, but she mentions that he has terrible breath, so he becomes furious, and he tries to attack her. But she manages to escape, and she slices off his legs, saying he won't be able to keep up with her. But he regenerates his legs, and the others realize that the monsters have become sluggish, so they think they have a chance if Silpha keeps damaging Pazu. Grimm is teaching Lloyd how to transmute his mana, but explains that it's a delicate process, thinking Pazu has a talent for it, since even demons struggle to use it. But Grimm discovers that Lloyd has already learned the technique, as he can shape the form and color of his mana. Pazu continues to struggle against Silpha, and she grabs one of the enchanted swords, revealing that she's proud to use one of Lloyd's swords. Pazu starts taunting her, and he runs around her, as he continues to insult Lloyd. So she becomes angry, and Pazu manages to eat her, but she cuts him from within, and manages to take off his head. She separates the demon from the beowulf, and everyone is scared seeing this, as she declares that she won't allow him to touch her master. Albert and Tao manage to defeat the last of the monsters, but Pazu starts laughing, as he releases an evil essence into the air. Albert commands the others to help Silpha, but he's caught by the essence, and even Silpha collapses because of it. Pazu is annoyed, as he broke the seal of the temple a century ago, and it took him a long time to create the minions they just cut down. He grows 2 pairs of wings, and throws Silpha into the lake, as Albert tries to get up to help her, but he realizes he's out of strength. Pazu explains that this is his miasma, thinking she has no chance against him, but she mocks him, telling him his breath stinks. So he becomes angry, and he attacks her, but Tao saves Silpha, and she doesn't seem affected by the miasma. But Silpha claims that she doesn't need help, telling Tao to protect Lloyd, but she ends up fainting. Pazu admits she's a good swordsman, but he wonders why Tao isn't affected by the miasma. She attacks him, but he grabs her with his tail, and he hits her, wondering if she can withstand his miasma because of her breathing technique, but her breathing was interrupted by the blow. He wonders why she didn't flee when she had the chance, thinking she must want to be his minion, but she hits him as she becomes furious. She explains that she would never abandon a handsome man in need, and she strikes him with a powerful ki burst. She tries to stabilize her breathing before he counterattacks, but a monster attacks her from behind, and she almost gets devoured. Pazu asks her about the handsome man she mentioned, saying he can only see rubbish lying on the ground, and he thinks the only handsome ones are his minions, who always keep rising. He releases his miasma again, and this time it affects her. He asks her if she wants to devote her life to him, but she mentions that she can feel Robert's presence, and it has been giving her courage all this time. Pazu wonders who she's talking about, so she tells him that the greatest hottie of all time is coming to defeat him. But the monster eats her, and Pazu thinks humans are pathetic. He pulls Silpha out of the water, thinking it will take a while to bring her under his control, but her strength justifies the effort, and he brags that no one can resist his domination. Lloyd mentions that must be how he was able to control the beowulfs, and he confirms this, explaining that all he had to do was kill their parents and use his miasma to replace them in the minds of the pups. But Pazu realizes something is wrong, wondering why Lloyd is moving so casually in the miasma. He doesn't know how to respond, and Pazu notices that he's treating his essence as if it were nothing. He also notices Grimm next to him, knowing he's a demon, but Pazu wonders why he looks strange, calling him a disgrace. So he becomes angry, saying he was going to give Pazu tips out of respect for the Demon Brotherhood, but now he has changed his mind. Pazu orders the beowulfs to attack them, and Lloyd wants to use this chance to test his transmutation. He decides to create a flowery field using his mana, and the beowulfs remember the feeling of maternal love, so they side with Lloyd. He manages to remove Pazu's influence from them, and asks one of them to let his friend out, so the beowulf releases Tao. Pazu can't believe Lloyd created such a large field using his mana, and realizes he's a great sorcerer. He tries to use his miasma on the beowulfs once more, but Grimm explains that it no longer works, because they now remember that he killed their parents. They launch a combined attack on Pazu, and this makes him drop Silpha. Lloyd is delighted to see how bear-wolves attack in packs, finding them much stronger than when they were puppets. But Paza manages to stop their attack and starts beating them, calling them ungrateful. He becomes furious and mentions that Lloyd is no match for him because no matter how many spells a sorcerer casts, he won't die. Lloyd has heard this before, and Grimm explains that demons have never been killed by magic. But Lloyd believes they're just hard to kill, so he wants to test how much magic it takes to end a demon's life. Pazu is terrified by Lloyd's mana, and Grimm knows that he's on another level, thinking Pazu doesn't stand a chance against him. He has a few spells in mind to test, and is excited to be able to do so without any restrictions. Pazu wonders why his mana is so dense, wondering if this is real, and he tries to capture Pazu, but he dodges the barrier. He realizes that Lloyd wants to put him in a cage to turn him into a test subject, and he runs off, as Lloyd keeps trying to capture him with barriers. Grimm wonders how many spells Lloyd can cast, and he explains he can do 20 spells at once, but he can use even more with Grimm's help. So he merges with Lloyd, and they create countless barriers with ridiculous speed. Paza goes into the water to escape, but the barriers keep coming, as he wonders how Lloyd can cast the spells so quickly. He comes out of the water, but is trapped by a spell called Dimensional Enclosure. He realizes that he can't escape, and Lloyd wonders why he's worried, because magic shouldn't work against him. He recalls that Paza murdered the bear-wolf's parents, and even performed experiments on them, so he can't complain about what Lloyd is going to do next. He uses his high-speed casting, so Paza becomes desperate and starts begging for his life. But Lloyd prepares to attack him with the 4 elements, and Paza freaks out, because he was never hit by this kind of magic before, so there's a chance he might die. Lloyd begins casting 240 spells per minute, and he decides to do this for 30 minutes, but he realizes that Paza stopped responding after 5 minutes. Grimm thinks it was due to the stress the multiple spells caused him, and Paza wonders how he failed so easily after a century of preparation. Albert and the others regain consciousness, so Lloyd tries to think of an excuse. He goes up to Albert, and Grimm tells Paza that humans don't want to follow leaders, saying they prefer to spend time with people who are just enjoying themselves, and thinks this is the reason why people keep flocking to Lloyd. Paza wonders if he lost because he wasn't having fun, and decides to entrust his ambition to Grimm, who eats his remains, increasing his mana. He watches Lloyd as he explains that Robert defeated the demon, and Grimm thinks that it will take more to beat him. They return to the city, and the king congratulates Albert for his success, asking him about the adventurers who helped him. So he explains that Robert left before they woke up, and Tao went after him, so the king becomes interested in his strength. But Albert mentions that Lloyd contributed the most to the hunt, as they only survived thanks to his weapons, so he asks the king to consider him as a successor. The king wonders why Albert wants another competitor, so he explains that he only wants what's best for the empire. The king accepts, and he asks Lloyd if he wants to be considered as a successor, but he humbly declines. Lloyd goes outside, and a bear-wolf wants to play with him. We learn that it followed him on the way back, and he notices how cute it is, but Grimm becomes jealous, so he changes his appearance, and Lloyd seems to like it. But Silpha arrives, so he hides Grimm and the bear-wolf. He tells Silpha that its name is Shiro, and he wants to teach him new tricks, but isn't sure how to do it. Silpha explains that monster tamers use their mana to teach amazing tricks, but Grimm thinks about how Lloyd gave up the throne and considers him a real magic maniac. Albert and the king watch him, and the king thinks he's modest, but Albert isn't sure if that's the case, and maybe the title of king is too small for him, so the king decides to keep an eye on him. Lloyd issues simple commands, and Shiro obeys him, but he reveals that Shiro is struggling to follow complex instructions, as he uses a command spell. But Shiro becomes confused, because he doesn't understand Lloyd's instructions. Lloyd realizes he needs to learn from a monster expert, and he thinks about his sister named Elise, who has tamed multiple monsters. So Lloyd decides to visit her, realizing that her tower is surrounded by friendly monsters, but she suddenly clings to him, saying she's glad to see him, and she even kisses him. Her maid Eris arrives, asking her why she kissed him, so she explains that she finds him cute, and she starts playing with Shiro, recognizing him as a bear-wolf. She mentions that she can connect with monsters through her instincts, but Silpha suggests leaving, thinking Elise can't teach Lloyd anything, because she doesn't seem to understand the concept of mana. But he asks her to show him one of her monsters, and a wolf suddenly appears behind him as she reveals that its name is Liru. Lloyd recognizes it as a high-class beowulf, and he can't believe it was able to approach him undetected, realizing that Elise was able to issue orders while she was talking to him. He thinks her orders must have been complex, because it approached him when he had his back turned, so he realizes that he can learn from her. He asks her to teach him how to talk to monsters, so she advises him to do it with love, saying it's the key to understanding monsters. But everyone thinks her advice doesn't make sense, and Eris thinks she can only do this because of her innate talent, but she claims that anyone can learn her skill. Lloyd believes her, and Silpha thinks he's starting to show interest in love, so she becomes excited, thinking he's growing into a man. He realizes that Silpha doesn't need to issue orders to the animals, because she's sharing her thoughts with them, revealing that he sensed mana flowing from her head. He decides to give this a try, sharing a mental image with Shiro, who suddenly starts running around him, before jumping up into the air. So Lloyd realizes that it worked, and Eris can't believe this, realizing he has already mastered the monster tamer's technique, but Elise thinks there's no trick involved, saying it's all about love. But he explains that love is just an important part of it, saying it's impossible to master the technique without a sense of empathy. He suddenly senses the animals approaching, and Elise clings to him, but she's still in sync with the animals, so they end up making a mess. After that, we see Lloyd riding Shiro, as he mentions that he can now connect with monsters. Silpha invites him to train with her, but Albert arrives, saying he needs to talk to Lloyd. So they start fighting over him, and he decides to go with Albert, who introduces him to the fourth Prince Dean. They head to a forge, where Dean reveals that he knows about Albert's enchanted sword, thinking Lloyd isn't capable of making it, so Dean decides to test him. Albert explains that Dean is a blacksmith, and he traveled to the nation of Bartram to pursue his passion, but he just tells Lloyd to start enchanting his sword. So he works on the weapon, as Dean notes that enchantment is considered as an advanced skill, and even the best enchanters in Bartram struggle to enhance a sword, so he doesn't believe Lloyd can do it. But he manages to enhance the weapon, and Dean can't believe it, realizing it's filled with advanced spells, so he realizes that Lloyd is the real deal. He looks forward to working with Lloyd, and he reveals that he wants to create the ultimate sword by making Lloyd enchant the steel while he's forging it. We learn that he tried to learn magic, but he didn't have the talent for it, so he wants to create a weapon that will allow everyone to cast spells just by swinging it. Lloyd agrees to help him because he wants to experience the production process, and they start working on the weapon as he asks Dean what kind of spell they'll be using. Dean wants to create a sword that shoots fire, but he knows that the fire spell has a complex casting formula, so the weapon won't be able to handle it. But Lloyd decides to give it a try, and the steel shatters, so he realizes that he needs to modify the formula. They decide to try again, but they keep failing, and Lloyd starts blaming himself, thinking there's something wrong with his method. But Dean reveals that he bought cheap mana essence, and Lloyd uses purification magic, realizing that it lacks hematite, so it isn't good enough for high-level enchantments. Silpha suggests going to a dungeon to gather hematite, and Lloyd can't believe she's saying this, because he isn't allowed to travel outside. But she reveals that the king gave him permission, thinking he needs to be exposed to the outside world. They head to the Adventurers Guild, where a girl named Katarina greets them, and she gives Lloyd a registration form. So he fills it up, as she explains that a crystal ball will measure his powers, saying it will determine his rank as an adventurer. We learn that Lloyd used it during his previous life, and he's afraid that it might explode if it tries to measure his full power. So he decides to suppress his mana, as he touches it, and it classifies him as an E-ranked adventurer. The other adventurers laugh at him, thinking he's pathetic, but Katarina realizes that his magic rating is incredible, thinking he's as powerful as an experienced sorcerer. But we learn that Lloyd was only using 1% of his total strength, so he was expecting the result to be lower. Katarina compares Lloyd to a legendary adventurer called the Silver Blader, who suddenly disappeared after clearing countless dungeons, but this makes the adventurers angry, thinking he's nothing compared to her. Silpha wants to accept a dungeon quest, but Katarina explains that they need at least one B-rank adventurer in the party, and one of the adventurers asks Silpha to go out with him. But she threatens him, and Katarina reveals that she's the Silver Blader, so the men are surprised, realizing they messed with the wrong person. But Katarina explains that Silpha has been demoted to the C rank, because she's been away for a long time. Tao suddenly arrives, saying she's willing to help them, and she reveals that she's now a rank A adventurer because she's been clearing dungeons as she searched for Robert. She asks Lloyd to introduce her to Albert in exchange for her help, and Katerina gives them a quest, as Lloyd realizes that Silpha was an amazing adventurer. But she reveals that she struggled against a certain group, which is known as the Assassin's Guild. They enter a dungeon, and they take the chest away so that Lloyd can use it to create the ultimate weapon. We return to Dean, as he waits for Lloyd to return, but Albert is starting to lose hope, revealing that they're on the verge of war, so they need the forge to create weapons for the soldiers. He thinks Lloyd won't make it back in time, so he tells Dean to put his research on hold, but Lloyd suddenly arrives with the chest. They're able to create the ultimate weapon, and Dean decides to try it, so he takes a swing, and it causes a massive explosion. But Lloyd realizes he overdid it, so he thinks about toning things down a bit. We see Lloyd resting in his room, as he reveals that he mass-produced the weapon for the soldiers, but he reduced the level of the enchantment, so the weapons just shoot regular fireballs. But he suddenly senses a strange presence, and we see a suspicious girl in the garden. He suddenly confronts her, and she tries to run, but finds she's trapped in his barrier. Lloyd wants to talk to her, but she reveals herself and unleashes a poison at him. Lloyd immediately purifies himself, but the girl tells him it's no use, because there's nothing that can purify her poison. Lloyd realizes it's because she's transmuting the nature of her poison with mana, and we learn that there are rare individuals who are born with a special type of mana called the Blighted. The girl introduces herself as Ren, the Poison Blighted, mentioning she has been spreading poison since her birth. She manages to break his barrier, but notes he will survive since he only took a light amount of her poison. She disappears, and Lloyd is impressed by her. Grim appears, wondering if he's okay, but thanks to his healing breath, he's able to recover faster than the poison's damage. Grim wonders why he didn't go after the girl since he's fine, but he reveals he wants her to lead him back to her hideout, mentioning the Assassin's Guild that Silpha told him about. We learn that there are 6 of them, and they each have special abilities, so Lloyd is excited to meet them. He manages to track Ren, so he heads off after her. We see Ren meeting up with the other members of her guild, and one of them is disappointed she got caught. She tells them about the mass production of swords, thinking it's a sign of war and a chance for them, but the man tells her to stop acting like Jade, saying that their leader is gone. Ren insists Jade will come back, but the woman mentions they are being watched, so Lloyd reveals himself. Ren is surprised since he should be poisoned, and the man recognizes him as the 7th prince. The group prepares to take him out since he knows too much, but Lloyd deactivates his barrier, causing Grim to freak out. He notes that since they are all unique, he wants to get a sample, as he uses his trace skill to copy Tao's technique. One of them suddenly attacks him, but he manages to defend himself thanks to using Tao's moves. The man introduces himself as Babylon, and he has a super flexible body. Lloyd is impressed he can use magic to increase his flexibility, but another man appears behind him, telling him to sink, as his body suddenly gets heavy. He's introduced as Crow, and he has the power of cursed speech. The third man prepares to attack, but Lloyd uses his strength enhancement to overcome the curse and dodge the attack. Lloyd lands on the man, but he reveals himself as Galilea the Spider. Lloyd seems to be stuck, but he gets free by getting out of his clothes. He admires all of their powers, but the woman suddenly attacks him, thinking he's strange for smiling in his situation. She suddenly stabs herself, and Lloyd takes damage as she introduces herself as Talia, the 100 Pains, who can share her damage with anyone that she can see. Talia thinks he must be afraid, but he's just excited to experience new types of magic. He instantly heals his leg, and it also heals Talia, so he starts to wonder if his attacks on her will be reflected back to him. He's excited to test it out, and he uses his trace to copy Silpha's movements. Galilea is reminded of the Silver Blader, and they all freak out as Lloyd charges at them. He easily takes out Babylon, and Crow tries to blow him away, but it hits Galilea instead, and he crashes into Talia. Crow tries to command him to stop, but Lloyd is faster, and he takes him out. We see Galilea is stuck to Talia, and when he tries to attack, he tears her clothes. Lloyd takes this chance to attack her, but she tells him it's pointless, since the damage will just be reflected, but Lloyd still wants to try, so she thinks he's crazy. He blows her away, and he takes the same damage, but he's just happy to experience it. Galilea grabs onto his weapons to stop him, but he just lets go, and uses Tao's technique to blow him away. Rin is terrified seeing this, and Lloyd tells her to use her poison again, but Galilea mentions she can't control her poison mana, so everyone will be caught in it if she spreads her poison. Lloyd thinks about how they all seem to lack control of their powers, and Galilea notes that they wouldn't have had to turn to a life of crime if they could control it properly. He charges at Lloyd, but he disappears and attacks him from behind. Rin rushes to help him, but Lloyd puts his barrier back up, and Galilea tells her to stop, because he's okay, and his mana is actually under control, as Lloyd reveals he engraved a spell onto his body to help him control his power. Galilea cries, realizing his curse is finally over, and Lloyd helps the others as well. Crow is finally able to speak normally, and he's overwhelmed with emotion. The others are also happy, and Lloyd is welcomed into their group, as Galilea washes his clothes. Lloyd wants to see their powers again, but Galilea decides to tell him their backstory instead. Lloyd says he isn't interested in that, but Galilea continues to tell him anyway. However, when he mentions their leader Jade, who has the power of teleportation, Lloyd becomes interested. We learn his curse would cause him to teleport randomly, but he manages to get back to the group. He shows them a coin, declaring it as their emblem, and decides to form the Assassin's Guild. He notes that they will take the shady jobs that the Adventurers Guild can't handle, and they will leave a coin behind so people will know about them, hoping that people will know they are doing good, so that one day they can live in the light. Galilea notes that they heard the Lord of Lourdes was preparing for war, but that's when Jade disappeared. Lloyd wishes he could hear more about the ability instead of the backstory, but there's suddenly a teleportation circle, and a letter suddenly appears. We see Silpha breaking into the hideout, but it seems they are already gone. Shiro points to a note, and it seems they have gone to visit the Lord of Lourdes. Albert freaks out reading this, thinking their relationship with Lourdes isn't good, and he wonders why Lloyd is with the Assassin's Guild. He wonders if Lloyd was kidnapped, thinking they may need to go to war, but Dean tells him to calm down, thinking no one would be able to kidnap Lloyd. Albert thinks he needs to find a peaceful solution, but Silpha reveals Lloyd's clothes from the hideout, so they think he was stripped, wondering about the sticky white substance, so Albert declares for war. We return to the moment before they left the hideout, as Galilea reveals that the letter is from Jade, and he reads it to everyone, revealing that Jade is now the ruler of Lourdes. He invites them to his manor, and they're overjoyed to hear this, because they're looking forward to seeing him again. They decide to meet him, and Ren invites Lloyd to join them. But he explains that the letter is suspicious, because it was teleported to their hideout, reminding them that Jade can't control his powers. So they think it's a trap, thinking Jade must be lying to them, but Ren believes in him, saying he must have mastered his powers. Lloyd decides to join them, because he wants to see teleportation magic, but Ren is worried that he might get into trouble. So he assures her that everything is going to be okay, saying they'll be safe as long as they follow him. They fly to the manor, but they land in the middle of the forest, because Lloyd realizes that the group is struggling to keep up with him. So they decide to take a break, and Ren decides to hunt food for everyone. Babylon reveals that she grew up in the woods, and her poison ended up killing her parents when she was young, so she learned how to survive in the forest. Talia adds that Jade was the one who found her, and in a flashback, we see Jade welcoming Ren to the Assassin's Guild. He tells everyone about her power, so they think she's dangerous, but he assures them that everything's going to be fine. He cuddles her, saying she smells sweet, but he suddenly collapses, as Galilea mentions that it's difficult to keep her poison contained. But Jade still wants to be with her, saying he needs everyone's help to raise her, and they agree to this, saying they will do their part. They find a way to control her poison, and after some time, they create a magical robe, which keeps her poison contained. They welcome her into the group, and Jade gives her a hairpin, but she suddenly starts crying, realizing she has found a place to belong. Back in the present, Talia explains that Jade is like a brother to Ren, and Lloyd looks forward to meeting him. Ren prepares food for everyone, but they think it looks disgusting, so Babylon tells Crow to use his cursed speech to make it taste better, but she hits him, and he ends up collapsing. Talia reminds her that Lloyd is a prince, so she thinks he won't like the food, but she sees him enjoying it, and we learn that he was broke in his past life, so he's used to eating anything to survive. Everyone tries the food, realizing it tastes delicious, and they enjoy the meal together. In another flashback, we see Jade telling everyone that the Adventurers Guild is reconsidering the bounties on their heads, so they celebrate, thinking they'll be able to live normal lives. He admits that he isn't really homeless, and he's actually the third son of the Lord of Lourdes, who is addicted to war. He reveals that he needed allies to put an end to the war, and he admits that he manipulated everyone, but they don't care, telling him that he gave them hope. They think he wants them to assassinate his siblings, but he explains that he wants to settle things on his own, because he wants them to live normal lives, seeing them as his family. He isn't sure if he's going to make it back, so he tells them not to give up on their dreams while he's gone, saying he wants all of them to enjoy their lives in Lourdes. We return to the present, as Lloyd falls asleep, so Galilea carries him around, as Grimm reveals that a barrier is surrounding him, so there's no need to protect him. They're about to reach the manor, and Wren suggests allowing Lloyd to rest, thinking there could be trouble ahead. So they decide to leave him in the woods, as they investigate the manor, realizing that everyone's preparing for a party. A strange creature approaches them, recognizing them as the members of the Assassin's Guild, so he welcomes them to the manor, calling them honored guests. They start enjoying the party, as Jade appears, and he uses his teleportation to change his clothes, revealing that he can now control his powers. They're overjoyed to see him, but he explains that he doesn't care, as he suddenly orders them to bow down, and they're forced to obey, as they realize that he can use cursed speech. His companions turn into demons, and he tells them that his plan worked, revealing that their goal is to collect blighted bodies. Grimm fires an energy beam, but Jade appears behind him and blows him away. He crashes near Lloyd, causing him to wake up, and he realizes that his companions are gone. He sees Grimm struggling, so he asks Grimm what happened, and he tells Lloyd that their companions are in trouble. We return to Wren, as she asks Jade what's happening, and his minions reveal their true form, as Galilea notes that they're psychic life forms, which can control human bodies. Jade explains that they're from the Netherworld, and he reveals that he used his teleportation ability to bring them there. He reveals that he took control of Jade's body to acquire the ability, and he introduces himself as Gazama, the catastrophe from the Netherworld, explaining that he was able to dominate Jade's mind. Gazama reveals that the bodies of the blighted are ideal vessels for them, so Jade tried to take his own life to prevent Gazama from controlling his body. But Gazama healed his body as he was about to die, allowing him to take over. His minions want to steal Wren's body, but he warns them to be careful because her body is poisoned, and her friends fall into despair, thinking it's all over for them. But Gazama notices a mark on her, realizing it isn't in Jade's memories, so he uses his cursed speech to interrogate her, but she bites her tongue, as he realizes that she's trying to resist. He tells her to sell her friends out, but everyone suddenly senses a strange magical energy, as Lloyd summons a massive energy beam, which eliminates the demons, leaving an enormous crater in the ground. The remaining demons freak out, realizing that Lloyd is overpowered. He heals Wren, and tells everyone to escape, saying he will deal with the demons. She refuses to leave him, but Galilea carries her away, telling her they're no match for Gazama, so they need to leave everything to Lloyd. The demons think Gazama is dead, but he suddenly appears behind them, reminding them that they need to capture the assassins. So they chase after Wren and her friends, and Lloyd tries to blast them away, but they're able to escape. Gazama's minions charge in, as he summons a dragon, which slips past Lloyd's barrier, so he becomes curious, thinking about letting it hit him, but he doesn't know if he'll be able to survive. So he decides to dodge it, and it hits a demon, as Lloyd uses his analysis spell, realizing that the demon has been killed in one hit. Grimm advises him to run away, explaining that Gazama isn't using spells, because he's transmuting his mana to launch projectiles. We learn that barriers are made of mana, and it protects its user from spells, but mana can pass through it, so it won't protect him from Gazama's attacks. He realizes that Gazama is a worthy opponent, but he looks down on his minions, thinking they're useless. Grimm reveals that demons are broken down by classes, and Gazama's minions are at the 10th rank, so they can easily be defeated by humans. Pazu is 2 ranks above them, and Grimm is considered as a 3rd-class demon, but Gazama is far above them, and he's considered as a demon lord, which is beyond the level of a 1st-class demon. Grim thinks Lloyd is no match for him, but Lloyd confronts him anyway, and Gazama asks him who he is. So he explains that he's the 7th prince, and Gazama reveals that he was in Jade's memories, thinking Jade wanted to see him. He wants to get rid of Gazama because he's after the Assassin's Guild, and Lloyd believes in their potential, so he wants to protect them. But Gazama only sees them as perfect vessels for his kind, so they prepare to fight each other. Grim advises Lloyd to run away, but he refuses, and Grim thinks he's being stubborn, thinking he doesn't stand a chance, because Gazama has extreme magic resistance, so Lloyd won't be able to harm him. He fires a projectile, which pierces through Lloyd's barrier, so Grim freaks out, because even his strongest spells can't damage it. Gazama summons countless weapons, and he launches all of them, destroying everything around him, as Lloyd tries to evade, knowing his barrier won't hold. But Gazama suddenly appears above him, kicking him away, as he combines the power of his weapons, creating a powerful drill, which threatens to kill Lloyd. So he summons a stone golem, which protects him from damage, as the assassins watch the fight, realizing that it's on another level. Gazama's minions see them, so they charge in, as Babylon tries to open the gate, wanting to help his friends escape. Gazama notes that he was only able to pressure Lloyd with his teleportation ability, and Lloyd reminds him that it belongs to Jade. But he explains that he was able to master it, saying humans aren't strong enough to control their powers. So he believes that the Blighted are meant to be possessed by demons, because they're the only ones who can unleash the Blighted's full potential. He claims that he has become the perfect being by possessing Jade, telling Lloyd that he won't be able to defend against his next attack, as he teleports the weapons, stabbing Lloyd repeatedly. We cut to Gazama's minions, as they continue to charge in, but Galilea stops all of them, saying his webbing will harden after a few seconds. Crow orders them to fall, as Galilea notes that they're now able to control their powers thanks to Lloyd. Babylon opens the gate, but the demons are able to break free, as Galilea realizes that his webbing isn't strong enough. Talia stares at all of them, and she cuts her leg, causing them all to lose their footing. Crow asks her what she's doing, but she tells her friends to escape, because she hasn't fully mastered her ability yet, so she might end up harming them. But Ren refuses to leave her behind, as the demons regenerate, so she cripples them once again, and she tells her friends that she won't allow the demons to steal her body. Ren begs her to join them, but Galilea pushes her away, and closes the gate, as Talia wonders why he didn't escape with the others. So he explains that he will help her stop the demons, knowing they can destroy the gate to pursue the others. He's ready to sacrifice his life to save them, telling Talia to strike the finishing blow as he holds the demons in place. So she prepares to cut her neck, as the demons charge in, knowing she's about to kill all of them, but Galilea stops them, as Ren starts crying, thinking her friends are about to die. We return to Gazama, who reveals that he's disappointed, because Lloyd wasn't able to keep up with him. He prepares to kill the assassins, but Lloyd's body suddenly crumbles, and he launches a surprise attack, but Gazama teleports away. He realizes that Lloyd used a decoy, and he's now using his weapon, so Gazama thinks the fight is about to get interesting. But Lloyd notes that things aren't looking good, and Gazama thinks he's freaking out, but he tells Gazama that they need to fight somewhere else, so he becomes confused. Countless fireballs suddenly rain from the sky, setting the demons on fire, as everyone wonders what's happening. The gate is suddenly cut to pieces, and we see Albert with the royal army, realizing that things have taken an unexpected turn. Ren is happy to see him, and he leads his men against the demons, determined to rescue his brother. We see Sylpha training, as she cuts a magically reinforced post with a single hit, but her sword can't keep up with her strength, so she knows she needs to hold back. But she worries about facing another demon like Pazu. Back at the castle, Ren is glad to see they have help, but Albert decides to deal with them first. Sylpha threatens them, and asks them about Lloyd's whereabouts, so Galilea mentions he's fighting in the castle. Ren reveals he's fighting the demon boss, but Babylon stops her, reminding her that Lloyd told them to keep his strength a secret. Galilea wonders why he hides his power, so Lloyd mentions he just wants to focus on studying magic, and doesn't want any attention. So Ren wonders what they should say, and Sylpha tells them their time is running out. She decides to start with Ren, but Albert stops her, and the group thinks he's a more reasonable person, but he just tells Sylpha to start with one of the adults instead. They swear they're friends with Lloyd, but Albert takes out Lloyd's underwear, and he doesn't believe them. Galilea says it's just a misunderstanding, because Lloyd's clothes were left to dry after being covered with his fluid, but this just makes things worse. Rin tries to convince them, saying Lloyd is fighting to save their precious family member, and a demon suddenly attacks, but it gets eaten by Liro as Elise arrives. She decides to trust Rin, mentioning Liro would have eaten her if she sensed any bad intentions, so Albert decides to trust her as well. He prepares to face the demons, and he orders Silpha to find Lloyd, but Rin tries to stop her, saying Lloyd is just fighting a weakling, so he doesn't need any help. But there's suddenly magic in the sky, and the bridge is destroyed. Dean notes that the demons are swimming toward the riverbank, and Albert worries about becoming trapped, so he orders everyone to pull back. Meanwhile, we see Lloyd and Gazama watching from above, not wanting to be interrupted. They continue their fight, and Grimm tells Lloyd he needs to focus. He sees Albert and his soldiers fighting the demons, but he thinks they can handle it, so he decides to focus on Gazama. The demons regenerate despite the flames, and Dean uses his sword to cause a massive explosion, but it's still not enough to defeat them. He notes that their magic swords use up their mana, and their soldiers will run out before the demons stop regenerating. Albert notices that Silpha is missing, and we see her riding Shiro, telling him to jump, but it's way too far. Silpha thinks about using a rope, and Shiro also thinks about seeing Lloyd again, so he suddenly jumps, but just falls into the water. A demon suddenly attacks, but Silpha defends herself, and the demon compliments her, but reveals that while the other demons are at the 10th rank, he's higher level than them at the 8th, so he tells her she stands no chance. Meanwhile, Albert notes how the demons are possessing the bodies of Lordist citizens, and he wonders if there's any way to save them. A demon suddenly attacks from behind, but Babylon saves him just in time. Albert notes how he didn't hesitate to kill, and Babylon thinks he's a kind person, just like Jade, but mentions that the citizens are already dead, so there's no saving them. Hearing this, Albert activates his sword, and decides to stop holding back, activating a spell that rains fire from the sky. The demons burn, and Albert orders his men to fight with everything they have. Meanwhile, Silpha fights with the sword demon, and they seem to be evenly matched. They both charge at each other with their sword skills, causing a shockwave, but it ends up in a draw, with both of them taking a hit, but the demon just regenerates. He declares he wants to take her body, wanting to also use her sword skills, as he suddenly uses a Lordist technique, delivering an incredible slash. Galilea wonders how he knows such a technique, so the demon reveals it belonged to the owner of the body, showing his calloused hands and mentioning that the man must have trained incredibly hard. But all his memories and experience now belong to him. He can't wait to take Silpha's body, but she suddenly attacks him with his demon sword technique. He wonders how she can use it, so she mentions she just learned it by watching him, calling him weak for needing to steal a body to learn the man's technique. She decides to get serious, calling for Shiro, but the demon doesn't think he will help her win. But she searches through his fur and pulls out a sword. We see that it was Lloyd who made it for her, and he notes that he didn't put any flashy enchantments on it, but made it as strong as possible, so it will be able to withstand her full strength, thinking she will be able to kill demons with it. He notes how demons are psychic entities, and they're harmless until they create or possess a body, but if the body is killed, then the demon inside will also die. However, the bodies gain incredible regeneration, and Dean wonders how they can be killed, so Lloyd mentions you would need an attack that's strong enough to kill them in one hit. Dean wonders what to name the sword, suggesting they can combine Lloyd and Silpha's names, but Silpha reveals it as the Demon Bane, to make up for her past failure. The demon thinks it's a ridiculous name, revealing that the destruction of the country was a plan to lure out Jade. They stole bodies from the people of Lordis and stirred up a war, causing Jade to return. Rin gets angry hearing this, and she charges at him, but Silpha stops her from getting in the way. The demon prepares to use his ultimate skill, but Silpha takes him out in a single hit. We see Jade in his final moments, as he tells Gazama he won't win. Gazama wonders what he's talking about, but Jade dies and Gazama takes control of his body. He wonders what Jade was doing before he died, looking through his memories, but the memories of his friends stop him from seeing anything, but he doesn't care, since he can now use Jade's power. The sword demon wonders what they should do next, and Kazama thinks about how Jade hated war, so he decides to start one. Back on the bridge, Silpha pays her respects to the man she cut down, thinking he must have been a great swordsman during his life. But there's suddenly an explosion of steam as the river evaporates. We see that it was Lloyd, but we go back to when he was being chased by Kazama. He wonders how to deal with the attacks, noting how the mana spears can break through single barriers, but it's fine as long as he keeps up a reinforced barrier. However, there's also Jade's teleportation ability, so he needs to be constantly moving. He tries to fight back, double casting a spell to create an enormous flaming giant, but Kazama just teleports away, and it ends up evaporating the river. Grim warns him to keep moving, but he notices that Kazama didn't attack with his teleportation, so he realizes it requires line of sight. He decides this is his chance to use his sword, and he suddenly attacks Kazama with countless clones. They all stab him, but he notices the one with the real sword and takes him out. He tells him it's useless since he can regenerate from any attack, but he starts to wonder why the clones aren't disappearing, and he notices the one he killed was just a fake. He wonders where the real body could be, thinking the best place would be to watch from above, but Lloyd suddenly attacks him with fire. The clones quickly shuffle, and Kazama wonders how to deal with them. He decides to attack them all at once, and he starts firing mana spears in all directions. He hits one with a barrier, but it turns out to also be a clone. He realizes Lloyd must have put barriers on a number of the fakes, and thinks Lloyd must be among them, but we see that he actually has no barrier, using a concealment spell to hide himself, while Grim wonders what he's trying to do. We learn that his sword is the spell taker, and it has the ability to absorb spells, which he can then use to increase his mana or analyze the spell. He manages to cut the teleportation, and he's transported to another space where he looks for Jade. He comes across Jade's will, and he finally understands. All the clones crumble, and Lloyd reveals himself. Kazama thinks he's giving up, telling him to join him, but Lloyd calls him boring. He notes how even though humans are weak, they struggle and are able to create incredible things. He mentions how every magic formula comes from their dreams, so it has no limits. Kazama doesn't care, and prepares to finish him off, but Lloyd hits him where he appears. He wonders how he was hit, and Lloyd tells him to bring it on. He tells him not to get cocky, but Lloyd reminds him of what Jade told him in his final moments. Kazama becomes enraged, but Lloyd continues to beat him. He tries to teleport away, but Lloyd is able to follow him, and continues to attack him. Lloyd blasts him with his magic, and he ends up falling towards magma, so he teleports away, but Lloyd still hits him. Lloyd wonders if he's done, so Kazama decides to show him what a demon lord can do, creating an enormous orb of condensed mana. He tells Lloyd it's impossible to stop, preparing to end the fight, but it suddenly vanishes, and Kazama wonders what happened, so Lloyd explains he cancelled it out with an orb of his own. He reveals he already knows the spell, and wondered what would happen if two instances collided, so he tested it out, and they cancelled each other out. Kazama thinks it's not possible, because a single orb requires an insane amount of mana, so he thinks Lloyd is lying. He prepares to steal Lloyd's body, grabbing him from above, but he's instantly overwhelmed by Lloyd's mana. Lloyd creates countless orbs, wondering if Kazama will die if he gets hit, so he tries to run, but still gets hit. Meanwhile, Albert and Dean struggle to see through the steam, but Silpha and Elise take advantage of it. Albert wonders why the sun isn't coming up, as he checks the time, and realizes it should be out, while the others sense something going on above them. We see Kazama being sucked in by an orb, and it's too much damage for him to regenerate, so he tries to abandon his body, but he gets stuck and can't escape. He realizes he's about to die, so he pretends to be Jade, saying that he's back, and telling Lloyd to stop his spell. He calls out to Ren and the others for their help, but Lloyd collides two orbs together and finishes him off. The sky returns to normal, and we see Jade's spirit disappear. Ren thinks back to the past, when Jade told them about the rumors on Lloyd. Galilea thinks he isn't special, but Jade mentions the accident on the day he was born, thinking he used magic right after his birth. Galilea thinks it's a ridiculous story, but Jade thinks that if he's a magic prodigy, he might be able to help them one day. Lloyd makes a grave for Jade, and Grim is surprised he landed the orb since it's a slow spell, but Lloyd notes it was thanks to being able to decipher his teleportation. Grimm thinks he's amazing for doing it in the middle of a battle, but Lloyd notes how the formula was laid out for him, so he knows Jade transcribed the spell in his final moments, and it was Jade who won the fight. Ren listens to him, thinking she needs to tell him how grateful she is, but Albert suddenly appears. He asks about the grave, so Lloyd panics, but he seems to know what's going on after talking to Galilea and the others. He's proud of how strong and kind his brother is, but notes how the Assassin Guild effectively kidnapped him and dragged him into a war, so they need to be punished. They offer to make amends by serving Lloyd for the rest of their lives, so Albert asks if he will accept them, warning him that he will be responsible for their mistakes. Lloyd thinks it's reasonable, and he agrees to take full responsibility. Albert tells him not to do everything alone, and reminds him to ask for help if he ever needs it, because he's his precious little brother. Tao suddenly appears, and she wonders if Lloyd is okay, but she realizes that things are already over, so she quickly runs off. But Albert goes after her, wanting to thank her for her previous help. We see the Assassin Guild being released, happy that Lloyd accepted them, so they plan to do their best to serve him. They all have tea together, and Tao gets nervous since they're royalty, but Albert thanks her and tells her to relax, so she orders Silpha to bring her tea, but Silpha spills it on her, so they start fighting. Albert also tells Galilea and the others to relax, and they decide to have a party for Jade instead of being sad. Talia tells Albert to drink with her, but he turns her down, saying he's still working, so Talia uses her ability on him, sharing her intoxication. But he suddenly asks Galilea why he covered Lloyd with his fluids, and they realize he's an angry drunk. Meanwhile, Silpha and Elise relax in a hot spring, and Silpha wonders what Ren wants, so she asks to be able to work with Lloyd, wanting to show her gratitude. But Silpha notes that it's not something she can decide, telling her to ask Lloyd himself, but he suddenly appears, telling her that it's fine. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.